people can join in when they're ready. Basically, what I've been doing up till now is telling you that liberal legal feminism is more than liberal feminism. That is, they're not only saying that you have to make the laws so that women can have what men have. So the more fundamental argument of legal feminism is that the categories of thinking have to change. So how liberalism thinks about the world has differential consequences for women, and that's why we use the example of public and private to show you that what are the consequences, what can be the consequences of we keeping on subscribing to the public and private distinction. Now, so say up till now we have said that gender difference is a significant difference that the law should be able to take into account, but in a more nuanced manner than just saying that give women what men have. All right. Now tell me, what do you understand by gender differences? So we may have 2 hours on that gender differences matter. I want to now ask you, what does it mean to say that there are significant gender differences that that we should take into account? He doesn't even know the question. All right, you want? Okay, why do you guys make me do all the talking? So tell me, what do you understand by gender differences between men and women? So what differences are we talking about? Are we talking about largely biological differences? Yes? Then why don't we call it sex difference? Why do we call it gender difference? So do you understand the distinction between those categories? All right. So in earlier feminist writing, there was a huge debate about whether we are talking about, when we ask that women should have equality, are we talking about women as a biological category, or are we talking about women as a social category? That is, if we are talking about the biological category, then we can use the terms male and female, which are the biological categories. But if we are talking about social construction of what does it mean to be a male or a female, that is where it is not really biological, but what significance we attach to those biological differences. And the argument is, like what you said earlier, that certain men want to be homemakers or want to look after children, primary caregivers, etc. So which category would we put them in? They continue to be male, but they don't live up to our understanding of what does it mean to be masculine in our society. Women who want to be successful professionals give up the possibility of having children. That's all. I don't want to go there. How are they portrayed in our society is that this is not a feminine enough woman, and this is the point the literature makes between a biological category and a social construct. But subsequent to that, now there is a rethinking of this neat division. So the argument is that sex and gender are actually not 2 different categories, they are very much connected. So the fact of your biology has then implications of what social category you will be. So for us to say this is a feminine man or this is a less feminine woman is slightly sort of saying that for everyone else it is very clear that men are masculine and women are feminine. what the theorists are saying now is, no, it is not so clear. Your biology definitely has a connection to what social characteristics you're supposed to have. Now, that is one thing, and that's the main thing I'll talk about. But I also want to talk about that as a man or a woman, is my identity only decided by my biology? Does it matter what religion I have? Does it matter what social class I have? Does it matter what sexuality I have? Do you see what I'm trying to get at? That as a woman, it's not only the fact of my biology or what that means in terms of femininity mean, but the fact that I belong to a certain socio-economic strata, the fact that I belong to a certain religious community, the fact that I have a certain sexuality, all of them come together to give me the identity that I have. So could I say that I'm not only defined as this person because of that I was born a female, but how I was brought up, what possibilities are open to me, and the rest of it. So the point that feminists are making is that feminism or gender differences is not only to do with biology, it is a complex interaction of what all factors go into making any identity. So whether this is for men or it is for women, it is the social construction of identity that they are bringing into the picture. So what they're getting at is that when you talk about gendering legal education or gendering law, it is not that we are saying make the same law applicable to men and women. That is like prehistoric way of doing feminism, and you have to be clear that the argument is basically that you are a product of your social context. This is a radically different proposition than what standard legal idea is of a legal person. Remember, we've been saying this quite often now, that in legal terms, a legal person is somebody whose gender doesn't matter, whose religion doesn't matter, whose sexuality doesn't matter, in that it is an abstraction. In opposition to that, a lot of critical theory, including feminist theory, is saying we have to understand the legal person as a situated person. That is, they are situated in their particular context. And it is their context that determines the perspective that they bring to the table. So who are the people who are doing most of legal theorizing? Or who are the person who are running most of legal institutions? Your courts, your legislatures, your police stations, whatever else you can think of. So do you see what I'm trying to say is that first, the argument that you are a product of your context, and what is your context forms your identity, and what is your identity then determines how you respond to any situation. Now, if you are the one who's doing the theorizing, do you think the fact that you are a woman who's of a certain education, who has a certain sexuality, who has a certain experience of being a privileged caste, etc., would it color your view on life, or your view on what would constitute, I don't know, fair industrial laws or fair family laws or something like, or not? Would it matter or not? Could you have the confidence that if I and you sit down to write a brand new family law code, that we will come up with same kinds of ideas? Yeah. There's a.
It will be too idealistic to presume that
Okay.
we will have same, same views on same
All right, so between you and me, then whose views should prevail as the law? Okay, at the very least, you are willing to acknowledge that who is doing the thinking, who's doing the theorizing, who's actually running those institutions, brings their value system, their perspective, their experiences into how they make laws, how they interpret laws, how they make theories, how they respond to theories. So this is what the feminist critique is, that basically law is male not because it represents men only, but because most of the men come from their perspectives and they are the ones who are doing all the thinking and writing and running the institutions, etc. That women's perspectives, ideas, values, etc. get left out. So how it is put in technical knowledge is that the subject of law, the knower of law, is male. So what feminists are saying is open up the possibilities that thinking about law, talking about law, handling of law happens by women also.
So I think could it be in a way where say a drafting committee comes up with a legislation and then say gives 1 month or 2 months time to open up for suggestions across the area in which it has to be applied? Could that be a solution?
Okay.
And plus in the drafting committee there are representations from those groups also in addition to that.
Yeah. Okay, so if you have people giving you their points of view, you'll be able to take those points of view on board. Are you open-minded enough to be able to do that? Can you?
Of public where it has to be applied in the end.
Yeah. So basically, if we keep thinking with those standard ways of thinking and standard ways of public and private and the rest of it, then whether you're making the law, I'm making the law, doesn't make any much difference, because our paradigms are the mainstream paradigms. So one argument that is made by feminists is that you have to acknowledge that in theorizing, in thinking about law, it matters what our personal perspectives are. So it's not only that we'll include other voices, that is important, but also what are the categories of thinking that have to change. The second point is that, all right, even if we can manage that, what does it mean to think like a woman? Do you think professionally educated, professional, middle class, upper socioeconomic status, majority community woman would think the same as somebody who hasn't had higher education, doesn't earn a lot, doesn't belong to the majority community, maybe is a marginalized section of society? Would our views be the same? Okay, so who will get to make the laws between these two hypothetical examples? Do you get the point that the perspectives that will come into making those laws will reflect all those internalized values? So we don't even have to articulate them, that we will say this is what is required, this is what means equality and the rest of it. The second point is that if you even forget all that complications of like so many factors have to be taken into account, just think about it, that I want to be law to take into account women's perspective. how would you decide something as women's perspective? Exactly, that's the point I'm making, that the category woman is so general that it gives you no inroad into how thinking should happen that takes into account the diversity of women. But even before going there, and in the break there was an example that if we say to the law that women of a certain age need time off from work or from education because of their menstrual period, and in that time it is a physiological need that they need to rest. Can we make an accommodation for that? Like, women are getting too uppity, they want everything. Can I say that? Why not? Either you want to be in the public sphere and we let you be there, but then don't try bringing in all your personal demands.
Ma'am, for that, first of all, we need to see women as human beings. Just like men, when they get sick, they get leave. It's a natural thing. We accept it without any hiccup. Similarly, when women have their own biological needs, we should respect that without having any prejudice against that.
All right. Matter resolved? Why not? What's the problem? What do you think? I want each of you to give me an opinion. Come on. You're going to be lawyers tomorrow. You want to earn big money, but you're not willing to argue a case even in a small class like this? Is menstruation sickness? Huh?
So if a man is sick, it is his choice whether to attend work or not. The same way it is for a woman also.
Is it a choice?
Because, okay, as a woman I would say, all women don't find menstruation to be a problem. So I do not see the distinction as a man and a woman, but it is individual. So I don't think it's a universal women's problem.
Okay, but it can be a universal human problem that whichever human needs that we will give it to them. Will that be all right? We don't say men and women. General rule.
Yeah.
That whoever has this need, we will give it to them. Are you all right with that? Yeah? What's the problem with okay, go.
I'm not sure if I got her point right. So if you're, let's say for example, you have X number of days which are for sick leave, and this applies to both men and women equally. First, I will have to look at whether, as she said, it might be an individual concern, but at the end of the day, if you are categorizing your menstrual cycle to be sickness, let's say, it is very much a function of you being a woman. So will you put that under sickness is question one. Second, you look at the probability of this. I mean, if you are ensuring using up, this is a very practical concern. If you end up using all your leave for, let's say, your menstrual cycle, what happens when you get sickness just like the men?
Yeah, just you catch a cold or you get typhoid or something else. But more than that, I want you to focus on the first point, that will you define it as sickness and then treat it by analogy that in our industrial laws we provide for sick leave. Hold on. What you're saying is half of humanity at certain point of time is actually sick. The point being, if men get sick, who are they compared to for them to be entitled to sick leave? Think about it very carefully, Okay. Repeat that please. Normal humans who can function. By definition, a woman then is not a normal human because she menstruates while the normal human doesn't. Okay, you have to capture this point. What feminists are saying is our standards, what we call normal, what we call universal, replicate what are men's capacities, what are men's needs. There is nothing neutral about it. It is saying that for you to be called a human, you must approximate the standard of being a male. Why? So all arguments about it is the employer's right to decide who to employ, etc., is an economic right, doesn't stop us from legislating that there should be a minimum wage, that there should be a minimum working conditions, right? So the employer has to pay for certain amount of sick days leave, has to pay a minimum wage, irrespective of whether they make enough profit or not. So your idea that the state doesn't intervene in economic relationships does not go to the next stage. When it comes to any entitlement to women because either they are menstruating and might need time off, or they are gestating and might need time off, or they are breastfeeding and might need time off, is treated as exception to the rule. So what is the rule? A male worker's body. It doesn't menstruate, it doesn't gestate, it doesn't breastfeed. Really? Is that what your neutral standard is? Do you get the point that what it means to acknowledge gender differences, not to make it an exception to the standard, but just as men need something, women need something by virtue of their physiology. Where is the problem? The problem only arises because we consider the norm to be a body that does not have these physiological needs. Okay, so if you seriously talk about gender differences being acknowledged in law, you have to acknowledge that there might be fundamental needs that women have by virtue of being women. That does not take away from the argument that they are equal to men. Okay, so this is the first point that is being made, that you don't have to make excuses or sort of try to make it an exception to the rule to say that women should be entitled to certain basic conditions of work. Yes.
Can we say this like we all are different looking wise, biologically? Me, Abhishek, everyone are different, but we are treated as male. Like being different in look wise also. So in the same way, women, even if they have that menstruation cycle period, so why we are seeing it as a sickness, or
we're not saying it as a sickness, we are saying it as that this is what is required for women of a certain age.
So that's what I was saying, that it is required, and despite this we can accept that they both are equal, the male and female.
Yes, exactly.
So
that is the point that is being made by feminists, that it is not that you give any legal recognition to any needs that women have by comparing them to men and saying we are giving you special rights. There is nothing special about it, in the sense that just like there is nothing special about men getting minimum wage or getting sick leave or getting annual holiday or whatever other entitlements are there. So the point here is that what do you mean by gender difference? Now one point is that there are fundamental, if you like, physiological needs that women have by virtue of being women. But what about the fact that I am a woman who also has a certain religion or a certain sexuality? So is heterosexuality your standard? If not, that we take into account sexual difference also. What does it mean? I just add physiological difference to now sexual difference to now religious difference, now ability difference, and make it into a total of all these differences. Is that a feasible way of doing it? And secondly, is it a desirable way of doing it? In other words, the complexity of your differences is something that has to be taken on board. That is, what is the meaning of, I don't know, I had an example, let me see if I can find it. Okay, freedom of religion. Freedom of religion for a Hindu woman means what? It could mean that I decide whether I follow certain practices or not. Freedom of religion, or okay, I know what I want to say now. Freedom of religion means that I decide whether I want to get married under the Hindu Marriage Act or not. Okay, nobody can stop me. There's a special marriage act, I can decide to use that, fine. Freedom of religion to my friend who happens to be a Muslim woman, similar thing? Similar thing? Okay, she is not my friend, she is my maid. She comes from a lower socioeconomic strata. Freedom of religion to her also could mean that she decides not to marry under the Islamic law and goes and marries under the Special Marriage Act. Really? What likelihood do you think is there that she can exercise that freedom like I can? Got the point that I'm trying to make? That how religious difference and gender difference interacts for me as an educated, socioeconomically stronger class is very different from how it interacts for somebody who's from a different community, minority community, and doesn't have the muscle power of that economic standing. So, can you say that religion and gender interact to create a specific experience and the law should take it into account? Or you have to recognize that for every situation it might be different. Now, as a feminist theorist, how many differences can I take on board? And isn't it enough that I have taken gender difference into account? Now you want me to take religious differences into account, then you want me to take socio-economic differences into account. What kind of theory will we end up with? Will we even be able to have theory? What do you say? Do you see the point that gender differences have been brought on the agenda by fairly powerful, educated women? For them, these kind of differences matter. For them, it doesn't matter that you come from a lower socioeconomic group, or you come from a minority community, or that you don't have that much social standing, etc. So a lot of legal feminist theory basically did not concern itself with multiple differences. And there was a very strong movement, and a very strong movement for third world feminists also, saying your definition of feminism is really very, very ethnocentric. These are your concerns, they are not my concerns. For me to be a feminist means that Dalit women should not be raped by the landlords of the village. Where is that represented in your legal writing? Why is it not represented in your legal writing? Where is the argument that most of casual workers are women and they don't get paid a daily wage? Why is that not the main argument that legal feminists are talking about? Because most legal feminists happen to be like me. They have cozy jobs, they have education, they are relatively empowered women, and they can afford to talk about very specific differences but not take into account the complexities of lives of women who are of different socioeconomic standing. So what happened to that argument that gender differences should be taken into account so that we can theorize in an inclusive manner? Does it stop with my experience? It should not. So that is where feminist theory is. It is saying that you have to take into account the complexities of difference. So it is not only about biological differences between men and women, it is also about all other sorts of differences. And if you find life very difficult to theorize like that, well, so it should be. Because if you don't theorize in an inclusive manner, you're leaving out chunks of society who have no voice. I asked you this at the beginning of the unit. How many women authors have you studied in your law? Half of your class is women. Probably half of your teachers are women. How come all the textbooks are by men? And old men by that? Has it ever occurred to you? So who gets to be the authoritative knower of legal understanding is the point that is being illustrated. So you read only what certain section of old men have to say as your understanding of law. Do you think you're getting objective knowledge? Who are trying to kid? What are you going to do about it? Precious little. There's not a lot you can do about it. The point being, and I think you've made this point quite often, but the point is that if you don't even recognize that this is happening, where is the possibility of change? So you are as much constrained by the social context in which you happen to be as anyone else. I do not have the option of standing out of the system and saying I will not engage with it. But at least by calling out and saying this is not what you claim it to be, I make a possibility of doing things differently. And this is the point of critique. That is, you make it possible that we at least start naming the problem differently, and then the solutions will of necessity have to be different. There is no guarantee that I will be able to provide you with solutions. There is no guarantee that you will be able to provide solutions, but at least we are not pretending that we live in a rule of law society. So that is the point of the exercise. Okay, on that very depressing note, I think we'll stop. Okay.